Hey all, in the previous video I'll walk you through setting up the build using a script created with Cake. In this video we'll see how to put that script to work automatically on every push to our main branches, master and develop, using a couple of cloud-hosted continuous integration providers, AppVeyor and Travis CI. Let's start with AppVeyor. AppVeyor is one of the main continuous integration providers for .NET projects for its ability to run builds on Windows. For instance, Travis, that we'll see later, doesn't provide Windows builds. Particularly, AppVeyor is even more useful before we had this cross-platform .NET Core, but it's still useful nonetheless, if for nothing else, to run builds on Windows. So let's go to AppVeyor's main page, which is this one I already changed. And if we want to create a project, we just go here and select the project. We have multiple providers to choose from. I'm using GitHub. And if we wanted to add a project, we just over here and click add. As I already have the project I want added to AppVeyor, I will skip this step, but this is how we would do it. Now back to the main page. If you go to the project page, we can see the last build. Last build the result and some logs. Of course, if I just added the project, this would be empty, but as I've done this previously, we have some results already here. Then we can move on to configure our build. There are two approaches. We can just head to settings and configure the build. There's a lot of tabs over here we can choose from to configure everything, or instead of configure everything in the website, we could create an appveyor.yaml file which describes the build and can be checked in with the rest of the source code, so every time we push the YAML file is there, and AppVeyor by convention is searching for that file and will use it to define its build. This is the approach I prefer, so I'm going to walk you through my AppVeyor YAML file, and it's over here, like I said, close to the project. So let's get started. The first thing is defining the version. I'm not using this for anything. I could use this, for instance, for when creating a NuGet package that would be like an alpha and published to myGet. I could use this version. I'm really not using it for anything right now, so I'm using just build. So it appears every time it builds, the version is the same as the number of builds already done. Then for the image, we can use more than one, and it's here we define like the operating systems that we want. In this case, I'm saying that the image is a Windows with Visual Studio 2017 installed. I could also use Linux, for instance, but as I'm using Travis for Linux and Mac builds, I'll keep AppVeyor only building on Visual Studio. Then we have the branches. Over here we have two approaches. We can whitelist or blacklist, or if we don't define anything, I didn't test, but probably will build every time. But I've created a whitelist, so AppVeyor will only work when the branches pushed are or master or develop. Every other branch is ignored. Then environment is where we define environment variables. These first two are just some stuff for the .NET SDK to bypass some stuff to avoid wasting time and resources unnecessarily. Then we have the API keys that we'll use to pass to the Cake build, as we saw previously, for the publish to NuGet and publish to corals. You can see that over here the environment variables are encrypted. It is not the API keys directly. This is important, of course, because we don't want our API keys going around the internet and being in source control so anyone can use them. We can encrypt this using AppVeyor's tool we have here, encrypt data. So if we want to add something to AppVeyor, we can just type something, encrypt, and we put this on the environment. Let's go back to the AppVeyor file. So encrypted. It's encrypted on the file, but AppVeyor will decrypt as he passes the environment variables. Then finally, like I said, this description is rather fast. We just need to call the cake script like we saw in the previous video. So I'm just passing as an argument the current branch. This is a AppVeyor reserved word. Then we can go to these environment variables that were defined. So you get API key and coveralls token are these over here and are passed to the cake script so it can publish what it needs. So like I said, AppVeyor is one of the main cloud providers for .NET applications, so it had already some predefined things like test and deploy, but as we are doing all of this inside Cake, I'm disabling these steps. All I really need to do is call the PowerShell script that invokes the Cake script, and that's about it for AppVeyor. Like I said, it's simple because the bulk of the work is already done in the Cake script. We can just check out for curiosity, but you can also check this out because this is public. Anyone can see this, not edit, but anyone can see this. So this is the logs that we would see when building our Cake script are the same that are here. So with AppVeyor done, we can now go to Travis. So this is the main page of Travis. Like in the case of AppVeyor, this would be empty, but because I already have the projects configured, there's already some info here. But if I wanted to add a repository, it will be basically the same. In this case, I'm only getting the GitHub projects, public ones, because of the Travis free tier only supports open source, like AppVeyor. So only supports open source public stuff. So that's all we get. And if we wanted to add a project, we just click over here. But I don't want. So like previously, the project is already configured. So I'll bypass this. Go back to the home page. So in the home page, if we click the project, it is the same as the home page. It's just like you see in the link is focused on this one. So we move in the same place unless I go here, and now I'll go here. And over here, the logic is the same as with the AppVeyor. We can just configure over here. We have options, settings, all that stuff. We can configure things, but I'm configuring everything in Travis YAML. So let's get back to Visual Studio Code, and right beside AppVeyor I have Travis YAML. It's really similar. The logic is about the same. It's just a slightly different format. So to start with, we have the language, which specifies some predefined steps. Probably I wouldn't did this because I'm defining everything I need, dependencies and all that stuff. but yeah, doesn't hurt to say the language is C#. Then we have the matrix. The matrix is where we define basically the amount of jobs associated with each build. In my case, I have two, one for Linux and one for Mac OS, but I could have more, like multiple versions of Linux, multiple versions of Mac, and different versions of dependencies, all that stuff. I went with the simplest thing, so I'm using just Linux and Mac. Then branches, exactly the same as AppVeyor. We can whitelist or blacklist. In my case, I'm whitelisting. So master develop. We're defining environment variables like in AppVeyor, but in this case, I'm only defining the .NET SDK related ones. I'm not using the API keys for NuGet and coveralls because I don't want to publish things repeatedly. So I'm handling the publishing from AppVeyor only, and Travis is just to make sure everything is working, building and testing correctly in Linux and macOS. So mono tells Travis we want mono installed in the image. That's because Cake requires mono when it's running outside of Windows, unless we do some trickery to make it work with .NET Core, but I didn't want to waste time on that. I just said I want mono and let Cake work as usual. Then I'm defining the .NET Core SDK version. And finally, the script that is invoked, like in the case of AppVeyor. In this case, I'm not passing, like I said, the API keys. I am passing a target. In AppVeyor, I wasn't passing a target because it is assuming the default one. But in AppVeyor, I just want, like I said, to build and test. The publishing of code coverage and NuGet is done in AppVeyor, so I would just want to build and test. And the current branch with AppVeyor environment variable. And that's it also for AppVeyor. Like I said, simple because Cake does all the rest. Here we just configure basically the environment in which we want the builds to run. We can see here the last builds that occurred. In this case, I could show you this other example. This, as I'm building only all Linux, the logs are here directly, but in this case, as I'm building on Linux and Mac OS, over here we can choose the jobs and click to see the detail and see the logs for the build. Lots and lots of logs. Okay, so that's about it. Now that we have AppVeyor and Travis configured, we have the bulk of the work done. So on the next video, I'll just add some extra touches to this whole continuous integration pipeline, namely seeing the code coverage report on coveralls that we are already publishing from the Cake script, but we didn't see yet the coverage report. And we will add some build information to the project GitHub page just for some overview. Just when we go to the page, we can see something. As always, any doubt or suggestion, please comment on the video, blog, or add me on Twitter. See yous!